Dilek Tuna, you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. The United States and Ukraine are set to have peace talks in Florida on Thursday. Deadly Israeli strike on Khan Yunis kills several people. And the United States is increasing pressure on Venezuela as a Washington fight over presidential war power intensifies. There are renewed diplomatic signals from Washington as US negotiators engage with Russia and Ukraine in an attempt to shape a path toward peace. While the talks in Moscow left major issues unresolved, Washington is now turning its focus to Ukrainian leaders for the next steps. Here's more.
The White House has confirmed that US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will meet Rustem Umerov, the head of Ukraine's National Security Council, in Miami on Thursday. The talks come after Witkoff held nearly 5 hours of discussions with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow earlier this week. The Kremlin said the meeting produced no compromise on ending the war in Ukraine, but that Putin was prepared to keep working to find a compromise. US President Donald Trump described those talks, which also included his son-in-law Jared Kushner, as reasonably good, but warned it was too early to predict any outcome. He said Russia very strongly wants a deal.
I don't know what the Kremlin's doing. I can tell you that they had a reasonably good meeting with President Putin. We're going to find out. It's a war that should have never been started. It's a war, if I were president, we had a rigged election. If I were president, that war would have never happened. It's a terrible thing. But I thought they had a very good meeting yesterday with President Putin. We'll see what happens.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that discussions with the United States would take place in the coming days. He stressed that any negotiation must be backed with pressure on Russia.
Everything is developing quite effectively right now. At the meetings in Geneva and in Florida, Ukraine was heard and listened to, and this is important. We expect it will continue this way. Only by taking Ukraine's interests into account is a dignified peace possible.
The talks in Moscow followed several days of US meetings with Ukrainian and European officials. Previously, there were concerns that the original US brokered 28-point peace plan leaned too far toward Russian demands. Kremlin advisor Yuri Ushakov said some of the ideas were more or less acceptable, but others were criticized by Putin. According to reports, there are two major issues that continue to be contentious: the future of occupied Ukrainian territory and security guarantees for Kiev.
Russian forces carried out an airstrike on the city of Sloviansk in Ukraine's Donetsk Oblast on Wednesday, injuring 8 people, including 2 children. Officials say the strike involved 9 aerial bombs that hit a multi-story residential building. The local governor urged people to evacuate to safety, warning that there were no safe places left in the Donetsk region. On Wednesday, Russia also struck an administrative building with a ballistic short-range missile, reportedly an Iskander-M. Experts say control of Donbass could allow Russia to strangle Ukraine and expand westward, with no signs of stopping the war once territory is seized.
Some of the fiercest battles in the Ukraine war are taking place in a region that could shape the future of the conflict, Donbass. But what exactly makes this region so crucial?
Strategically, it is important for Russia because, one, it could mean expanding Russia's territory westward and taking Ukraine's territory by taking Donbass, using, again, this narrative of these ethnic Russians or the Russian speakers to sort of justify the invasion, which has been what we've seen for the last at least 3.5 years. In addition to this, though, beyond Donbass, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Zaporizhia become very important for Russia strategically because it gives them greater access to the Black Sea. As you move westwards in that way, and then even into Odessa, that would essentially cut off Ukraine's access to the Black Sea.
Currently, Russia controls about 88% of the Donbass region and more than 70% of Zaporizhia and Kherson, while Ukraine still holds around 5,000 square kilometers of the Donbass, which most countries recognize as Ukrainian territory.
There is the economic element to it in that the resource is there, although the reality is these resources likely will not be able to be accessed for arguably a decade at least because of the mines that are in these regions, the fact that these lands have been completely destroyed, these cities completely flattened. I was speaking with a soldier earlier today who just said, there's nothing left. It's just piles of stones left in some of these cities like Soledar, Mariupol, Bakhmut. There's nothing there anymore because it's just simply stones. I mean, arguably, we would say that actually Russia wants to take all of Ukraine, not just Donetsk. Russia has really showed no indication that it wants to stop this war once it acquires Donetsk and Luhansk. If this were the case, it wouldn't have launched the 2022 invasion. Really, as in the last 10 years, or especially since 2013-14, as we've seen increasing westward integration in Ukraine, and that is only, I guess, fired up, if you will, Russia's desire to keep Ukraine within its control. Donetsk and Luhansk are easier regions to keep it in its control because it has occupied these places since 2014. So it has been able to control them. It has put in, puppet governments. It has put in their own people there. It has built it in its own way. It is in many ways indoctrinating children, etc. Right? You see this. It's able to control these regions in a way that it would never be able to should it now take new territories.
Experts warn that Russia shows no sign of stopping the war once it secures the Donbass, with concerns that taking territory by force could set a dangerous precedent for the 21st century.
Lithuania's Vilnius airport had to suspend flights for a second time on Wednesday after suspected balloons were spotted in its airspace. Authorities have linked the balloons to smugglers transporting cigarettes from Belarus. They blame Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Lukashenko, however, denies the accusations and has accused the West of fighting a hybrid war against Belarus and Russia. Vilnius airport has had to close more than 10 times since early October. Poland is stepping up the protection of its national power grid by teaming up with the military. Under a new agreement signed in Warsaw, the armed forces will assist the Polish power grid in securing more than 16,000 kilometres of high voltage lines and more than 110 transformer stations.
Poland is ramping up security for its national power grid amid concerns over potential drone attacks and sabotage. The army will now work directly with the power operator to protect critical infrastructure, including transformer stations and high voltage lines stretching across the country. A formal agreement was signed in Warsaw between the Polish Armed Forces and the Polish Power Grid, PSE.
This will involve assessing plans, security measures, joint exercises, and the participation of the military as an expert institution. It also means transferring experience from Ukraine.
We've had situations where attacks occurred, we can say it, attempts to interfere around the oil terminal managed by PERN. There were drone flights near power stations and transformer stations, so we want to draw on the best practices that the Polish armed forces have today to protect this infrastructure, which will continue to grow and which, those who want to harm Poland, constantly monitor and know is on the front line of our security.
NATO member Poland has faced a series of incidents since 2022, including drone incursions and a recent railway explosion, which authorities say demonstrate Russian state terrorism. The grid, which links Poland to neighbouring countries like Lithuania, is a vital part of Europe's energy network and the focus of increased protection efforts. The agreement marks a major step in safeguarding Poland's energy network, combining military expertise with technical know-how to ensure the resilience of critical infrastructure against future threats.
At least 5 people were killed Thursday morning after an Israeli airstrike hit Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. The strike comes a day after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promised retaliation for an attack on Israeli troops in Rafah.
At least 5 people have been killed and more than 30 injured in Gaza's Khan Yunis after an Israeli airstrike on Wednesday. The strike hit tents in the Al Mawasi displacement zone, with subsequent explosions near the Kuwait hospital, causing panic among families in the area. 2 children were among those killed. The Israeli military said it was aiming at a Hamas operative but gave no further details. Hamas condemned the strikes as barbaric and indiscriminate, accusing Israel of violating the ceasefire and holding it fully responsible for the consequences. On Wednesday, 5 Israeli soldiers were wounded in the south of the Strip at Rafah. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described that as a breach of the ceasefire that began in October. Gaza health officials say more than 350 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire took effect. Israeli authorities say Hamas has killed 3 Israeli soldiers in the same period.
Lebanon and Israel held their first direct talks in more than 40 years on Wednesday. Representatives attended a US-chaired ceasefire monitoring committee in Nara. Lebanese Prime Minister said the talks only focused on last year's ceasefire, including hostage release and Israeli withdrawal, and are not peace talks. Israeli spokesperson Shosh Bedrosian called the meeting a historic development, crediting Netanyahu and noting potential regional cooperation. French President Emmanuel Macron is in Beijing for talks with China's President Xi Jinping, his 4th visit as Europe looks to recalibrate its economic and security ties with China. Macron is also meeting China's senior leadership to address strained trade relations and urge progress on the Ukraine crisis. It's the second day of his 3-day state visit. Here's more on the story.
French President Emmanuel Macron and China's President Xi Jinping pledged cooperation on Thursday across a range of global issues, including efforts to end the war in Ukraine and trade relations. The 2 leaders oversaw the signing of 12 cooperation agreements covering multiple sectors. President Xi said both sides had agreed to focus on 4 key areas, starting with strengthening political trust.
We all have agreed to focus on the following 4 areas. First, enhancing political mutual trust. Regardless of changes in the external environment, both sides should consistently demonstrate the independence and strategic vision of a great power, and strive to understand and support each other on issues related to their core interests and major concerns.
In his turn, French President Emmanuel Macron, keeping EU-China relations at the centre of his visit, called for a more balanced economic relationship.
Europe and China have a role to play in laying, alongside other partners, the foundations for fair and robust global economic governance, based on rules and not the law of the strongest. The imbalances that are accumulating today are unsustainable. They pose a risk of financial crises. They imperil our ability to grow together.
The war in Ukraine was a major point of discussion in Beijing. Macron urged China to support efforts for a ceasefire and to back a halt to strikes on critical infrastructure.
I hope that China could join our call and our efforts to achieve, at the earliest possibility, at the very least, a ceasefire in Ukraine, in the form of a moratorium of strikes targeting critical infrastructure.
In Beijing, Macron is also holding talks with Premier Li Qiang and China's top lawmaker, Zhao Leji, before travelling on Friday to the southwestern city of Chengdu.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is about to visit Delhi for the first time in 4 years. The talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi are expected to focus on energy, defence and trade, testing India's ability to balance relations with Moscow and Washington.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin begins a 2-day visit to India, his first in 4 years, aiming to reinforce a partnership that has shaped Moscow and Delhi's foreign policy for decades. The timing is highly sensitive. India has cut back on Russian crude under tightening Western sanctions, while the United States is urging Delhi to scale down its wider economic ties with Moscow. For the Kremlin, the visit is about securing two lifelines, energy and defence. India is still a major buyer of discounted Russian crude and one of the biggest customers for Russian-made weapons. Moscow also wants help easing pressure on its energy sector, where access to parts and technology has been restricted since the war in Ukraine. For India, the stakes are different. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is trying to preserve what he calls strategic autonomy, maintaining close ties with Russia while managing an increasingly fraught relationship with Washington.
The tariff imposed on Russia, on India by USA has slightly, unnerved us. Unnerved us in many ways because many of the traditional exporters are now out of job. The people dependent on those manufacturing garments, for example, are now jobless. So they are looking for avenues. The latest data also shows that we are diversifying. So why not diversify with Russia if they have the requirement of Indian goods, which earlier was being sold to, say, USA or other countries?
Analysts also expect the talks to result in new defence agreements. Russia has offered the Su-57 fifth-generation fighter, while India is also considering additional S-400 batteries, a move driven in part by regional competition with China and Pakistan.
And many of the arms that they are selling to us, we manufacture them and also sell to other countries. For example, BrahMos is being sold to Armenia and Philippines, right? So I don't think India would shy away just because there is a Trump tariff going on or there is a pressure from the Trump administration.
Alongside defence and energy, Modi wants to narrow a wide trade gap. Indian exports to Russia remain modest, despite record turnover driven by crude purchases. Both sides are exploring a free trade deal with the Eurasian Economic Union and cooperation in nuclear energy and shipping.
As the United States continues mounting pressure on Venezuela through new military movements, a political fight is ongoing in Washington over presidential war powers. Lawmakers and military officials are signalling next steps that could shape US strategy and the stability of Latin America.
American troops are set to begin strikes on drug cartels' ground facilities in Latin America. That is according to the US President Donald Trump's remarks during a discussion with journalists in the Oval Office. A bipartisan group of senators on Wednesday introduced a war powers resolution seeking to halt what they describe as unauthorized US military hostilities in Venezuela under President Trump. The resolution, which now heads to the committee for consideration, argues that Congress has not approved military action in or against Venezuela, adding that the power rests exclusively with the legislative branch. Meanwhile, the US military is ramping up its presence in Puerto Rico, deploying Osprey aircraft, naval ships and additional personnel as Washington intensifies pressure on Venezuela. The build-up comes days after Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro confirmed a respectful and cordial phone call with Trump, which he framed as a potential opening for diplomacy.
I received a phone call and spoke with President Donald Trump. I can say that the conversation was in a respectful tone, and I can even say it was cordial between the US President and the President of Venezuela. I add that if this call means there are steps towards a respectful dialogue between states, between countries, then welcome dialogue, welcome diplomacy, because we will always seek peace.
It follows months of US actions targeting Venezuela, including strikes on alleged drug smuggling vessels, threats of military force, and the decision to label the Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization.
Federal agents have begun a major immigration operation in New Orleans. The Trump administration has paused applications from 19 countries, sparking criticism at home and abroad.
Federal agents swept into New Orleans on Wednesday as the Trump administration opened a new front in its nationwide immigration crackdown. About 250 agents are taking part in Operation Catahoula Crunch, targeting immigrants released from local custody after arrests for crimes such as armed robbery, home invasion and rape. Masked Border Patrol teams were seen patrolling Latino neighbourhoods and making arrests across New Orleans, Metairie, La Place and Gretna. At the same time, the Trump administration has suspended all immigration applications from nationals of 19 countries already under US travel restrictions, freezing green card and citizenship processing. The pause affects countries including Somalia, Sudan, Iran, Eritrea, Haiti, Yemen, Libya and Myanmar. The move has sparked backlash abroad. In Mogadishu, residents say the policy unfairly targets whole communities, while in Togo, travel agencies report that visa applications stopping overnight, disrupting business and travel plans.
Since Togo's ban, there are no more visa applicants. This already affects part of our core revenue. We handle ticketing naturally, and so with no more travellers, the business has already taken a hit.
The White House has defended the measures as necessary for national security following last week's attack on U.S. National Guard members in Washington. President Trump has also criticized Somali immigrants and their participation in welfare programs.
I hear they ripped off Somalians, ripped off that state for billions of dollars, billions, every year, billions of dollars, and they contribute nothing. The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you.
Since January, Trump has made immigration enforcement a priority, expanding raids, tightening asylum rules and imposing travel restrictions.
And now in news from West Africa, after what students say were 13 months of peaceful demonstrations, protests in Senegal have turned violent as demands for government financial aid persist. Security forces used tear gas to disperse the crowds and several students were injured.
Students and security forces clashed in Senegal on Wednesday after protests over unpaid stipends and other financial support. The unrest comes as the country faces severe financial pressure and a debt load the International Monetary Fund says equals 132% of its GDP. Officials at the country's main university called in law enforcement when students threw stones, prompting security forces to fire tear gas. Students say the government has ignored their demands despite 13 months of peaceful demonstrations. Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko, a graduate of the university, had vowed to tackle unemployment, corruption and elitism. But since he took office in April last year with President Bassirou Diomaye Faye, the government has been criticised by opposition parties over its handling of mounting social and economic problems. An audit ordered by the administration found a larger than expected budget deficit and debt burden left by the previous government, slowing talks with the IMF.
The Olympic flame for the Milano Cortina 2026 Winter Games has reached the Acropolis in Athens for the Greek leg of its torch relay. Olympic rower Stefanos Touskos lit a cauldron before the Parthenon in what officials say represents a new model of regional games. The flame will be handed to Italian organisers on Thursday before beginning a month-long relay through 60 cities and 300 towns. More than 10,000 torchbearers will carry it to Cortina di Ampezzo in northern Italy, where it is due to arrive on the 26th of January, marking 70 years since the 1956 Winter Games opened. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll discuss the mixed messaging from Moscow and Washington after talks and what these behind-the-scenes negotiations might mean for the future of the war. We'll see you shortly. Welcome back to A News. Russia says it is no closer to peace after hosting US envoys in the Kremlin, but members of the American delegation say the discussions had a positive outcome. Now, despite the contrasting public statements, both sides appear willing to keep talking behind closed doors, raising new questions about whether these back-channel negotiations could open the door to a potential diplomatic track on the war in Ukraine. Joining me now to discuss is Enrique Cosero. He's a political analyst from Madrid. Enrique, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we have two conflicting narratives. Russia says no progress, while the US delegation calls the meeting positive. What does that tell us about how each side is framing the talks?
As much as we can say, or as much as we can suppose, this means is like it's like always. Putin is just keeping a card under his sleeve, and he's not going to commit to anything until he gets what he wants. I said repeatedly, but nothing has changed my mind till now, that Russia, Putin, doesn't want a full speed recovered Ukraine, but just the opposite, which means that he doesn't need any sort, he doesn't want any sort of aid from Europe. He doesn't want any sort of aid from the US, even if the US is taking some profit of the peace, not only morally, but probably in natural resources. And Putin want is just some sort of weak surroundings, and not only in Ukraine, but in the rest of the countries that Russia has a border.
Okay, now you say Putin won't stop until he gets what he wants, but how credible is Moscow's claim that the meeting brought them no closer to peace at all? Is it strategic messaging rather than honest assessment?
I think we have to take them both. I mean, as I said, if Vladimir Putin doesn't get what he wants, probably he's gonna keep on threatening for a long time, and some of those threats can become real. It's hard for me to believe that Europe is gonna pay some sort of the Putin's wrath for not being fair on its own terms. But on the other hand, we know for sure that Russia is not the strong country that Putin wants to project that it is. So we are juggling here with several balls on the air, and trying to, and those assertive sentences could be taken as can be taken in both ways. Some of them could be true, and some of them could become a fact, can become actual, and some others are going to be forgotten.
And from the US perspective, Enrique, what would constitute a positive outcome at this stage?
Of course, first and foremost is going to be for the best shake of Donald Trump, as it happened in the Gaza war. He's given all that he got for having a diplomatic solution with again Witkoff and Jared Kushner on the field, and Marco Rubio just trying to get in touch with Europe and trying to take the temperature of Europe about the thing. And on the other side, probably we can neglect that Ukraine is full of natural resources that the United States need for being not so dependent from them. So it's a very good deal for the U.S. and for Donald Trump if they can reach an agreement on this conflict.
Okay, and are we seeing the opening of more dialogue here, or was this more about exploring possibilities with no formal roadmap yet?
I think that as long as we've been knowing till right now, we're gonna hear for probably 1 or maybe 2 weeks more about talks without any sort of concession, any sort of definition about what those talks are carrying, and which piece or which sort of the agreement are gonna be on that final project. So I think the main character from this story right now is just the suspense itself.
Okay. And why might Russia be signalling pessimism publicly while it still engages privately? What advantage does that narrative give the Kremlin domestically and internationally?
Playing tough. I think that Vladimir Putin is just playing tough, which means that I'm a hard enemy. No, probably enemy is not the word that he wants to use, but I'm a hard rival, and I'm not gonna give up any of my conditions in order to reach an agreement. This is gonna be the way I want it to be, and I think it's that the main narrative. So toughness on one side, pessimism on the other side. Just give the sensation, just given the feeling, or just given the projecting the feeling of there is no chance of the guy falling down the horse or just getting out of it. So it's just a question of how can I say this? I'm not the guy to convince. I know what I want, and I know what I'm gonna get, which is exactly the same that I want. It's just a question of make the rival loosen the spirit.
And conversely, why would the United States choose to emphasize the positive? Is Washington trying to project momentum or encourage further dialogue?
It's because, as I said before, for the U.S. and for Donald Trump, this peace agreement means a lot for being considered sort of the great peacemaker of our time. And I don't think the United States are gonna surrender easily on the thing. And if they do, if Donald Trump does surrender or just move out from the peace conversations, it's gonna be for just saying it is gonna come along with some sort of excuse that those guys don't want to hear. Those guys don't want to listen. So I think he got the two main exits completely covered. One, if the peace talks become a success, and on the other hand, if it doesn't, if the peace talks are not a success, he has already the justification of two bands that they don't want to listen to each other, not even with intermediation.
And how is Kyiv likely to interpret, or how does Kyiv interpret these secretive diplomatic contacts? Is there a sense of relief that, these major powers are talking, or concern that deals might be discussed without Ukraine being involved and at the table?
We have to remember that Ukraine was involved in another sort of talks with the United States last week. So it's I truly believe that they're aware that they are playing this game, and this game means that 1 week is for Ukraine and the other week is for Russia, and with the United States trying to act as a hub, as some sort of connector before the two main countries get in touch with each other and trying to soften the way to the peace, trying to soften it the most, because otherwise all these talks could as we are watching Vladimir Putin's attitude, I think that it will be not an easy thing if they just gather into the same room, around the same table, because it's not going to be easy. So I think the United States is playing as well a softener role in order to reach an agreement. And once they got all the middle ground completely cleared, probably, and completely defined, probably they're gonna gather around the same table. But right now, this is the game. We are talking with these guys. Next week, we are talking with those guys. And the next week, probably, we're going to come back to talk with the first ones. So, as I said before, for me, I'm given just a minimum of 2 weeks in order to know something that we can consider solid.
Okay. And what about reaction across Europe, Enrique, especially among countries that have been pushing for stronger support rather than premature negotiations?
Here we have to consider that we are talking about two different scenarios that people tend to confuse with each other. One is the EU, the European Union, and the other is NATO. NATO and Mark Rutte is completely involved in trying to make Europe stronger in order to face a country as Russia and a leader as Vladimir Putin. And Mark Rutte is trying to make the organization, the NATO, more agile. The European Union is confronting a very hard situation because the European Union exists to compete with these big countries that are China, Russia, and the United States. And all of these three countries got a very strong man in power, and the decisions are taken in full speed, most of them. The European Union doesn't have this. All the decisions have to come with an agreement, with a lot of talks, inside talks, with a lot of time needed for getting out some sort of decision, and that takes away lots of advantage in order to compete with these three countries. So I think Mark Rutte is trying to push as much as he can the European defense, and the European Union has to realize that there is a pace that the Union is not marking, and they have to take a speed.
Okay, Enrique, that's all we have time for, unfortunately. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for your insight.
Thank you for having me.
We'll take a break now, and when we return, we'll take a look at key stories shaping the region. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Turkey is telling Russia and Ukraine to keep energy infrastructure out of their conflict and wants energy flow to continue uninterrupted. It's after a series of attacks off Turkey's Black Sea coast. And Ankara says the escalating strikes pose a serious risk to navigation and stability in the region.
Ukraine is targeting Russia's oil exports, which it says funds the war, as Moscow bombards Kiev's power grid. Naval drones hit 2 Russian-linked oil tankers, the Kairos and Virat, in the Black Sea last week, damaging the vessels as they headed to Novorossiysk to load oil for export. The attacks also damaged infrastructure at the Caspian Pipeline Consortium terminal, halting operations. The strike prompted Kazakhstan to protest, calling them unacceptable and harmful to bilateral relations. Turkey, a NATO member, has kept warm relations with both Kiev and Moscow but calls the attacks unacceptable, warning both sides after discussing the issue at a NATO meeting on Wednesday. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan says the strikes are heightening security risks in the region. The recent attacks in the Black Sea in particular have demonstrated how justified the warnings we, as Turkey, have been making since the very beginning. Because the geography of the war is spreading, the methods used are becoming more widespread. This is a very scary thing. Now, because this attack on 2 vessels sailing at open sea within our exclusive economic zone actually endangers navigation safety in the Black Sea, it is making the Black Sea an area closed to trade. Another incident was reported on Tuesday when the tanker Midvolga II came under attack 80 nautical miles off Turkey's coastline while sailing from Russia to Georgia with sunflower oil. The vessel, which was en route to the port of Sinop on Turkey's central Black Sea coast, suffered no injuries among its 13 crew members. Russia condemned the strikes as terrorism, and President Vladimir Putin warned of retaliation against Ukrainian facilities and vessels. Both earlier hit tankers were reportedly subject to Western sanctions, and the attacks have disrupted shipping and pushed insurance rates higher across the region. Ukraine maintains that its operations target Russian military and economic assets, not third countries.
Iran launched naval military exercises in its southern waters on Thursday and at the same time concluded hosting the joint counter-terrorism drills of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to northwest of the country. Our Turaj Shirililiu has more.
Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps staged 2-day naval drills in the Persian Gulf and Oman Sea waters on Thursday, and also launched the final stage of the joint anti-terror exercise participated by the special units of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization member states. The naval exercise, codenamed Shahid Nazeri, is named after commander of the elite units of the IRGC Navy and is covering the maritime theater in the Persian Gulf, the Hormuz Strait, and the Sea of Oman. The Strait of Hormuz, in which Iran is staging the war games today and tomorrow, connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and is a key waterway for the transit of oil and natural gas to global markets. Iran has at times warned that it could restrict the strait's traffic during heightened tension. Also on Thursday, Shanghai Cooperation Organization concluded the 5-day Sahan 2025 anti-terrorism drills carried out in Iran's East Azerbaijan province. The Fa Press website, which covers military and defense news, quoted IRGC sources saying that the last day of the joint war games focused on hostage release tactics as well as cross-border counter-terrorism operation. Turaj Shirililiu, Tehran, A News.
President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, on Thursday received the UK Minister of State for Defence, Lord Vernon Coker, for talks focused on strengthening bilateral cooperation. Coker conveyed the greetings of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and reaffirmed London's interest in elevating relations with Baku to the level of a strategic partnership. President Aliyev recalled his recent meeting with Starmer during COP29 and highlighted the long-standing trust-based ties between the two countries. Lord Coker also congratulated Aliyev on the progress achieved in Washington in August toward normalizing relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. President Aliyev welcomed the remarks, stressing the historical importance of the developments and acknowledging the role played by US President Donald Trump. He underlined that Azerbaijan initiated the peace agenda and would continue pushing it forward. Afghanistan's foreign minister has spoken out for the first time following the shooting of 2 US National Guard members in Washington, saying the attack was an individual act with no links to his government or people. His comments come as the US Department of Homeland Security announces the arrest of an Afghan national on charges of supporting ISIS-K. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more details from Kabul.
Speaking at a gathering of political analysts at Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi addressed the violent incident in Washington head-on. He said the shooting was an individual act and, in his words, had nothing to do with Afghanistan. Muttaqi went further, saying the suspect had been trained by the United States and brought into the country through what he described as an illegal process that violated international law. He also drew parallels to Afghanistan's own recent history, claiming thousands of similar killings were carried out by individuals with comparable backgrounds over the past 2 decades. Meanwhile, in the United States, the Department of Homeland Security has announced the arrest of Jan Shah Safi, an Afghan national whose application for temporary protection status had been terminated. DHS officials say Safi was detained in Virginia on charges of supporting ISIS-K. According to US authorities, Safi is also accused of supplying weapons to his father, identified as a commander of a militia group in Afghanistan. The announcement comes amid heightened scrutiny of Afghan nationals who entered the US following the withdrawal of American forces in 2021. A process that brought tens of thousands of evacuees to American soil. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll discuss what renewed engagement between Turkey and Finland tells us about their shifting relationship and how it fits into wider regional diplomacy, including efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Finland's President Alexander Stubb and Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan held a phone call on Wednesday discussing bilateral ties as well as regional and global issues. The two leaders also touched on efforts to end the war in Ukraine, while President Erdogan underlined Turkey's intention to deepen cooperation with Helsinki, particularly through new steps aimed at boosting the bilateral trade volume. And joining me now to discuss is Bekir İlhan, Turkey research from the Turkey Research Foundation in Ankara, Turkey. Bekir, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what does this phone call between President Stubb and Erdogan signal about the current state of Turkey-Finland relations, especially after tensions around NATO enlargement?
The diplomatic efforts regarding the Ukraine war has been quite intensified in recent days, given the talks between the United States and Russia and the United States and Europe. And in these efforts, I would say Turkey is an important actor, is a pivotal country, and President Erdogan holds many phone calls and many diplomatic contacts in recent days. And I would say the call traffic has been quite intensive as well. And the call from the Finland's president is no exception in that regard, I would say. Of course, many issues has been discussed during this call, from the war in Ukraine to the bilateral relations and the trade volume between these two countries. But as you know, the war in Ukraine was the central theme in this phone call, I would say. And Turkey is doing its best in bringing peace in the war of Ukraine. And peace process or Istanbul talks are the clearest demonstrations of these efforts, I would say. And I think that it's not surprising that such a country like Finland, is calling Turkey about Ukrainian war, because Baltic states, especially Finland and the other Baltic states, are seeking alternative coalitions or alternative partners and to build a coalition or a front against Russia, because they, given their population, military capacity, geography, etc., they are unable to, counterbalance Russia on their own, I would say. And this is also valid in the war on Ukraine, I would say. And also they acknowledge the central role of Turkey, both in European security and, of course, for the Ukrainian war. And that's why this phone call, especially for a country like Finland, very important in diplomatic efforts bringing peace in Ukraine, I would say.
Okay, but could both leaders discussed efforts to end the war, end the Russia-Ukraine war? What influence can Finland, as NATO's newest northern member, bring to diplomatic conversations around peace?
Yeah, as I just mentioned, Finland's Finland, given its territorial approximity to Russia, given its historical background with Russia, of course, they feel a Russian threat in the first hand. It's not surprising that Finland, is kind of a position, is in a position that seek alternative coalitions, and of course, they have become a NATO member recently, and I would say, they seek alternative coalitions, and Turkey is a pivotal country in this regard, I would say. Of course, they acknowledge the role of as well, and they, especially Baltic countries, they cannot, in the long run, at least they cannot, balance Russia. But I would say with the help of countries, big countries, major countries like Turkey, maybe they can create effect. Maybe they can, build coalitions. Maybe they can build dialogue, and maybe they can express their interest in the diplomatic table, with the help of actors like Turkey, I would say. And Finland at this point, is playing on, this situation, I would say, and that's why I'm saying that both all Baltic countries and all, not just Baltic countries, I would say, the many European countries are just acknowledging their role and the effects of Turkey in bringing peace in Ukraine, I would say.
Okay, Bekir, let's emphasize the Turkey angle here. Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has warned that Ukrainian attacks on ships in the Black Sea pose risks to regional trade and maritime safety. How seriously is Ankara taking this threat, and what message is Fidan trying to send to both Kyiv and Moscow with this statement?
Yeah, I would say it's a very serious issue for Turkey. Like I said, Turkey has tried to contribute to the peace, but at the end of the day, in recent attacks on the Turkish cause, I would say, makes things very different, I would say. And this is also a threat to Turkish coastal security, I would say. And Turkey is not seeking, or Turkey will not want or will not accept, such a thing that the war between Ukraine and Russia, expands into the, wider Black Sea, because as I've always been saying that Turkey is a very important actor in Black Sea geopolitics, and Turkey is also a strategic stakeholder. Of course, Turkey is not a warring party. Turkey is not fighting in this war. That's true. But at the end of the day, given the Black Sea geopolitics, Turkey is a very important country, and Turkey is a strategic stakeholder in this regard. Its role is going beyond just being a mediator country, I would say. And President Erdogan has also warned both sides, both Ukraine and Russia. And of course, the war should be end, but before that, it shouldn't be expanding, or it should be contained, I would say. In this regard, I would say Turkey is just seeking to stop this kind of expansion, and of course, it's very important for Black Sea geopolitics and Black Sea security, I would say.
Okay, Bekir, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for your insight, and we appreciate you joining us on the program.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.